All right, today's topic is going to be about the Old North problem, which is, I guess, would be the old lineup with Magus, Config, Cajun, MSL, and AZ. And the reason I decided to do this now is because they've changed lineups, so they've booted Magus and they've brought in Valde. So I wanted to highlight some of the problems I saw in the old lineup, so that so that you can kind of understand what exactly is changing in the current lineup or what they're doing. So I guess the old North, the one with Rubino, was close to a championship contending team, and I actually think if they had kept that, I'll get back to that later. But basically, the thing you want to keep in mind about the old North, the one with Rubino when they were still Dignitas, is that Rubino as a player was generally underrated, or I guess it depends who you ask. But he was easily, I'd say, among the best support players. So he'd be on the level of somebody like Zipnix and BK, seized when he was good, like those types of players. And when he was taken out, like there was a huge like problem, I guess, in that obviously, as far as we know, Rubino took himself out of the roster, even though they wanted him to stay. But the problem with taking out Rubino was there was no obvious fit in the Danish scene for somebody that could replace Rubino, or even in the scene at large. I think, those types of very good supportive players who have that mentality of playing what I call like the six role, the role where you're willing to do anything to help facilitate your teammates in order to make them shine. And they just take a bunch of the rules that normally most players don't want to play, and you do it without complaining. You do it without like affecting the team atmosphere, stuff like this, right? There are, like I said, there are very few players that have that kind of mentality and have the kind of skill to like really shine in that role. So when he was taken out, they instead brought in AZ from FaZe, and AZ he was okay in the old FaZe, but he wasn't like lighting up the charts. He wasn't somebody you would think, oh, this guy, he's a superstar player. Or he wasn't. I don't even think he was like a star player in that FaZe lineup, to be honest. He was just an okay player who had some good games every now and then. So the idea was behind that AZ lineup was, you return to the past, because AZ was once a superstar level player, and he was his best during his time under MSL, and MSL famously has like that super structured style where everybody knows their place, and then you just do what you're told. I guess that's kind of the feeling I'm getting from the old MSL. But going to this new roster, MSL, I feel like he was losing power, I guess, because when you look at the new roster now, you have Config, MSL, Magus, AZ, and Cajun B, and this was like a very skill laden like team, especially before we figured out later that Magus was figured out. The problem was, like I said, there were 3 stars, so the question was exactly how are we going to fit everybody into it. So they put AZ into Config's old role, which is like second in, and then like MSL would bait the shit out of himself for him, so he could get the refrags. Config would take like some of Rubino's old like lurker rules, but unlike Rubino, he'd play it aggressively. He'd play it like a superstar player. Like, you're allowed to make as many solo plays as you want, and then you can break open the sites as much as you want, and that's fine. And then Cajun and Magus were left with the remaining rules, or I guess Magus's rule never really changed in that sense. So that's kind of how it worked out for North. And then as time goes on in the North lineup, you see there's like obvious problems. The first problem is like on highest level, which is MSL himself. Like this team never had a home map. North, they were just very good on multiple maps. They were okay on a few other maps, and they could play the rest. And the thing about North was that almost all their maps were at a pretty decent level, or a pretty good level, or a pretty high level, but they were never like the automatic number 1 team on on any particular map. So in which case, you want a leader that can take, because you have such a wide map pool, you wanted a leader that could take your maps and like and put your like relative strengths to their relative weaknesses. But MSL turned out to be more like Exist, where he's like, fuck it, we're just gonna play things I think we're good on, even if that means they're good on it too. And this already lowers your chances. So that was the first problem. The second problem obviously is the CT sides, and this is something they eventually like recognized, and among all of the teams post the E League Major Shuffle, North probably shuffled the CT side positions the most among the top teams, and the reason for that, I've been rewatching a bunch of their VODs, and I feel like the obvious problem is when you reach the top level, either two things happen: either you get figured out and you have to change, or you're so fucking good at what you do that people have to change to you. And so so for the 2-star players, we have Magisk and Config, and they actually had like, they represent both routes. Magisk, he got figured out. I feel like he was figured out in almost every single map except for Cobble and Overpass, where he could still do the shit he was still doing. So like, he was still a menace at long on Cobble. He was still a fucking menace in like restrooms on Overpass. But every other position he had on CT side was becoming progressively weaker. And the reason for that is because he was incredibly like static. He kept pulling out the same moves over and over again, and then you can't really do that, not unless it's like, actually I don't think you can ever do that. You have to basically be playing towards the information you have, towards like what your teammates, and like you have to have like various setups just so they know you're not always playing that kind of style. Whereas in Config's place, he actually did play a similar style, but the thing was, he was so good at killing people. He's like a god at putting that crosshair in people's heads, so he gets away with it, so to speak. But even like Config did have some serious, I won't say serious, but he had some weaknesses in his style that like you just have to accept that this is who he is, because Config is the guy who's super aggressive. Like, you know, obviously the one moment that'll probably define the rest of his career is when he pulled out the fucking knife in the overtime at the major. It's like, what the fuck are you doing, Config? That's basically who Config is in a nutshell. It's like, he is the guy who will attack and attack and attack regardless of circumstance. And so he'll win you rounds, he'll lose you rounds. This is a guy who will win you games, he'll also lose you rounds. And you just have to accept that this is who he is. And you know what? Like, I think in his particular case, the strength and weakness come to the same place. So if you try to like limit the weakness, you're also limiting his strength, I guess. So I guess that's why you just keep letting him go free reign, so to speak. So on CT sides, you have Magus going down, and then, you know, MSL was never really that great. And then you have AZ, who they try to put him in Rubino roles, except he was way worse than Rubino. Rubino was a much better player in those particular roles. So they're like, okay, well, Magus is going down. AZ is not very good at these roles. Let's try swapping it up. And this is like a literal way of changing the look of the team, right? Because you're obviously playing a different area, and this didn't work out that well either. Like I said, neither Magisk or AZ could play Rubino's roles as well as Rubino did on the CT side, at least. And if you just look at the balance of the team, like, you could, a general way people put it is like star players and support players, but another way you can put it, but I feel like calling AZ and Magus star players at this point is like a bit much. Another way you could put it is aggressive players and defensive type players, whether or not like you're a star or support player. And in the case of North, they had 4 aggressive players and 1 defensive player. And the 4 aggressive players were Config, MSL, Magisk, and AZ. So what would happen is they do like a bunch of aggression all across the map, but if you do that, you're basically just gambling, because you're going into a bunch of duels and because you're the one attacking into a defensive position, more than likely than not, you're probably losing. Or like, I remember there was this one like game on Cash where like they did like a triple aggression on CT side on B and middle and A main, and basically Magus gets the kill at A main, but so like AZ and MSL, like, they back off from mid and B. But thing is, I think it was Fnatic who instantly like recognized, oh, we lost somebody at A main, we have to attack the other 2 areas, we have to trade, and then they kill the other 2. So you turn like a 5v4 into a 4v3, and then all of a sudden you're at a loss. And this happens a bunch of times in like in North's like CT side career on rifles. So that was that was another problem is like the loss to Rubino and the fact that neither AZ or Magisk could like fulfill Rubino's roles as well as Rubino did hurt them. The other problem was as a CT sided team, they weren't very good at force buys or they weren't very good at ecos, and this is a huge problem when you're talking about teams like SK, FaZe, G2, like the top echelon Astralis, all have like very strong force buys on the T side. So you're always gonna have to win more rifle rounds as North against those teams relative to like what the other teams have to do, because you're not gonna get that random one win where like maybe Nico gets a triple kill with his Deagle. That's not gonna happen for North. So that was another problem. And then there's also just they tried to bandage the problem, I think, by introducing the double op, where they kept getting config the second op more and more and more, and eventually they started giving him the primary op at times, and it was okay-ish. But what would happen is you're basically opening yourself up to executes if you go for that double op style, and this is why they lost the Hellraisers at Starlight Kiev on Cash. Is because they were like dominating the CT side and they decided, oh, maybe we'll just go for a double op, and then they basically opened themselves up to an execute that they like shut down instantly when they were just on a one op setup. But on a double op setup, they didn't have the firepower of like Config's rifle to like shut it down, so they kind of got screwed. They screwed themselves there, right? So that's like I said, there are a bunch of small minute problems, and all these things add up over time, especially because they're not able to solve these problems because they don't know how to get Magisk back to that star level. They can't figure out where AZ should be put on their CT sides. And then we haven't even touched the T sides yet, so I guess we'll go there next. And for the T sides, like what happened was MSL. It's actually hard to say. So either one of two things happened. Either MSL truly believed he had three like superstar players in Magus, Config, and AZ, in which case you do run that loose style, you let them make the plays, and then you run off of that, like kind of what Kerrigan does on FaZe, or what Fallen does on SK to an extent, right? And then what happened is, honestly, the only player that could play at that level was Config. Like if you watch any of the Cash T sides, there's a high chance where like they don't really run tactics as much as they just give. At some point they stopped running tactics on that map as much as they just like Config just go open B and like, okay, I'll go open B, and then kills two people. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, Config is fucking amazing. But Magisk and AZ couldn't do that, and so what would happen is they went away from like the old MSL style, which was very very tactical, very like well sequenced. So for instance, he'd do like a very fast set execute in like the first round, then in the second rifle round he'd do the same thing except with a small adjustment, and then the third rifle round where he knows you're basically stacking or trying to counter that execute, he'll run a different tactic that'll like abuse that one, and then he'll run a fourth tactic that'll abuse like the third one. Like this was what he was doing before, but as you get farther and farther away from like the E-League era, like he stops doing these like very complicated and well thought out plans, and he starts doing more defaults. He starts doing more like 4-1s where like Config is on the lurk or AZ is on the lurk, and then they hit the site, or like they do something on a split, and then there's like a lurker on the other side of the map or something like this. And the problem with doing that is they didn't have the personnel to do it. Config was good on the lurk and he was good as second entry in, but AZ wasn't good enough for what they were trying to do, and neither was Magisk. So they were always like, they didn't really have the firepower to pull off that kind of style. And so that was another problem. So now we go into the current North, and Valde does have the team aspects that Rubino had, and he has like he has better fragging than arguably Rubino. As to whether or not he has as good fragging as Magus at Magus's pure potential, I don't think so. I think Magus was really really godlike during his like the end of 2016 when he was in the epicenter to the DreamHack, the E-League run, like the E-League and the E-League like major run. Like I legitimately think like Magus was like a top maybe 5 or 6 player at the time. I don't think Valde's ever reached that level of fragging, but Valde is a much better team player as far as the rumors go, and as far as like what you see in the game, he seems like a very smart player. He seems very in tune. He has good fragging. So the question you have to ask is where exactly does Valde fall in line for the T sides? Because I feel like in the C sides it's very obvious where he's going to be put. He's going to be put into like the old Rubino roles, like hard solo anchors, to maybe take drop, something like, or maybe he might not take drop. Maybe I think MSL is taking that position, but like play or he'll take a bunch of like these problematic roles that like North basically had no answer for. So I think that's like a very natural fit for Valde because he's like a smart player and he's not a player who I think he needs his spots as much as like he'd much rather just win. I guess that's kind of my feeling I get from that guy. So the T side, you have to think about exactly where he fits because he as a team player he'd be good as a supportive type, like third in, throw the nades at, like I guess it'd be more like Coldzera where basically you could play. I think his natural role should either be like a Coldzera type role where he's like a third in where he's throwing the nades, but the whole point of the Coldzera role is like when you get into the post plant situation, Valde is the guy who's going to like clean up the game or clean up the round because he has the intelligence and the fragging in order to defeat the other side, or you can put him as a lurk, and then you put config as second in, and then all of a sudden your ult for ones have a lot more strength to them because I feel like Valde as a lurker has I've seen it a few times I saw it a few times at Malmo. I thought he was pretty good. I thought he had good impact. I thought he wasn't like I thought he showed enough like enough presence at his lurker role that he wasn't like basically baiting his team and he wasn't like sacrificing himself for nothing. It's a very complicated role, I guess, in that sense. So I feel like he could do that too. So those are the things you should be looking out for North in the coming tournaments. I think they're playing in Montreal and E-League and one more, I forget which. But I feel like if these things can get figured out, we have like a legitimate. I won't say championship contender, but I feel like they should be in top 5. I feel like that's where they should have always been, but they were so underwhelming. They've basically like instead of being in top 5, they've been in top 10 or been top 10 the entire time. So that's kind of where I want to see them go, and see how it goes later.